Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. Terror strikes the U.S. and Europe, but what is a false flag? Is Mossad behind it? Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. I knew this was very fishy yesterday. I let a little bit more information come out. Benjamin Netanyahu threatening the U.S., threatening Europe. Won't be no Palestinian state, or it's going to be a lot of this type of terror. Salute.
אני ראיתי בדרך הנה סרטון של יהודי שמתנפל על אחד המרצחים.
There's something sus about this whole thing. The guy, the hero of the day, he was not Jewish, he was Muslim. Today, we witnessed a violent and horrific attack on the Jewish community in Australia, and that is something that we cannot and should not stand for, and something that we must condemn with our full chest. Okay, 15 victims and a gunman have died after a horrific attack on a Hanukkah festival in Sydney, Australia.
Let's go back to Rex Quayle, who's on the scene down there at Bondi Beach. Rex, what do you have for us?
Hello again. I've just been speaking with a few more people. They saw that I spoke to one gentleman who said he saw at least 3 people die in front of him. There's reports of four behind me. I'm not going to show it, but behind me in this scene, we can see that what very much looks like someone that has passed away.
The New South Wales Police Force said more than 36 people remain hospitalized following the attack at Bondi Beach, one of Sydney's most famous destinations. Victims range in age from 10 to 87, and many of those being treated were in critical condition. I'll say once again, we must not celebrate violence, nor dehumanize people. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, people are people. And so, most importantly, perhaps, we should not allow these kinds of horrific events to be politicized in order to push for further violence. Because guess what? The Jerusalem Post is now pushing a narrative saying that Iran was maybe involved in the Bondi Beach shooting. They say that Israeli authorities are investigating whether state actors, chiefly Iran, were involved in the mass shooting attack against Sydney's Jewish community at Bondi Beach on Sunday. A senior U.S. official told Fox News that if the Islamic Republic ordered the attack, then the U.S. would fully recognize Israel's right to strike Iran in response. People call me crazy for thinking events like this might be potentially false flags, right? They say, how can everything be a false flag? But if the first response from Israel and the United States is to say, let's bomb Iran, I think it would be somewhat journalistic malpractice not to investigate that possibility. This is from the Times of Israel, 19th of August, 2025. Quote, in a scathing letter, Netanyahu gives Australian Prime Minister until Rosh Hashanah to act against anti-Semitism. Or else what?
On August 17th, about 4 months ago, I sent Prime Minister Albanese of Australia a letter in which I gave him warning that the Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia. I wrote, your call for a Palestinian state pours full fuel on the anti-Semitic fire.
Is this what it's all about? Do they actually care about anti-Semitism? Or is this just about the fact that earlier this year, the government of Australia recognized Palestine as an independent state? I mean, explain, how do calls for a Palestinian statehood embolden violence against the Jewish people? If anything, wouldn't it do the opposite, right? If I was some kind of crazy, radical Islamist and my government said, we agree with the thing that you're fighting for, wouldn't my reaction be, okay, cool, thank you, I'll take a beat?
What would they attack?
At least that's my thinking. I could be totally off base here, so feel free to check my logic. Unless, of course, there is something else going on. I posted this earlier today. Naveed Akram, one of the alleged shooters in the Bondi Beach attack, was searched in Israel on December 9th. You could see right here the massive spike today once the news broke of the horrific shooting. But if you rewind a couple of days or a few days, December 9th at 4 a.m., there were some pretty significant spikes or search traffic for one Naveed Akram. By the way, the identity of one of the shooters, Naveed Akram, was confirmed by the UK paper called The Telegraph, and the other alleged shooter was his father, in fact. Anyway, I wanted to investigate whether or not the search spike for Naveed Akram was just a technical glitch, a coincidence, or maybe a potential warning or foreknowledge of the event happening. So I asked Gemini for an unbiased analysis, and its conclusion was, quote, random noise is the statistically safer bet, but the foreknowledge / sweep theory is operationally plausible enough that it cannot be dismissed. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. Now, before I go any further, I'm just going to put out the regular disclaimer that I always put out whenever I use AI. I know a lot of people have strong opinions against using AI. I'm not one of those people. I think AI, there's a lot of downsides, but it can be a powerful research tool as long as you understand what it is, as long as you look up the sources. And in this case, we're using it to kind of posit some theories and which ones may or may not be most likely. It's not giving us a definitive answer. It's giving us a road to go down. So the first thing it does is give an argument for random noise, that they say this is actually the strongest argument against conspiracy, is that the name Naveed Akram is not unique, right? I think it's unique because I've not heard that name, but apparently it's quite common in other languages. And they say that the name Naveed Akram is actually a known public figure, specifically in this case, a former Pakistani national team footballer born in 1984 who played for the WAPDA FC. They also say that this low volume trigger in a country like Israel, the search volume for Pakistani football is nearly non-existent. However, if there's 3 to 5 people, perhaps foreign workers, sports bettors, or data scrapers search for the footballer status or history on December 9th, Google's algorithm would register that as a spike relative to the baseline. And why this matters is when the sample size is in the single digits, noise looks like signal. A tiny cluster of sports fans look identical to an intelligence sweep on a graph that is normalized to 100. Yeah, so this does appear to make sense, right? Occam's razor, the simplest solution is oftentimes the correct one. And in this case, given the fact that Naveed Akram is also the name of a professional Pakistani footballer, this could all very well be a coincidence. But let's look at some of the other possibilities, okay? The argument for foreknowledge. If we entertain the possibility that this wasn't about soccer, the activity on December 9th fits the specific pattern of an intelligence sanitization or verification check. If an agency like Israel's Mossad or Unit 8200 receive a tip or was preparing an operation involving the suspect, they would almost certainly perform what is called a digital or a public digital footprint analysis before the event. Why Google, right? A lot of people ask, why would the hell would they be Googling stuff? You know, don't they have other databases? Well, Google says that the answer is something called red teaming, that intelligence agencies have their own classified databases, but those databases don't tell them what the public sees. If you're running an operation or tracking a terrorist, you need to know if a journalist Googles this guy on the day of the attack, what will they find? They need to verify if his legend or cover story holds up, or if there are any incriminating photos that link him to the wrong people. I've not worked in intelligence, but this also makes total logical sense, right? Let's make sure we have inventory of this guy's online footprint. If he's posted something, what he's posted, if anything he's posted would potentially jeopardize the mission, if a mission were to exist, of course. Gemini calls out a third possibility here that I haven't even thought of, called the leak theory. And they call this sort of the middle ground, that there's a third possibility that is neither a coincidence nor a grand conspiracy. And they say that it is also possible that on December 9th, Israeli intelligence intercepted chatter regarding a specific threat named Naveed Akram. This information may have been shared with a limited circle of analysts, security contractors, or journalists. One of these individuals, who were quote unquote read in on the threat but undisciplined, may have privately Googled the name to see who he was. This is known as a security violation, where a human operator leaves a digital trace of classified knowledge due to curiosity. Now, I see this one as probably the most unlikely of them all, because I think there was, if you look at the chart, I think there was just a little too much search traffic if all the activity was supposedly pinned on maybe one guy who acted out of order, essentially. So the conclusion here, based on Gemini's analysis, that it is 70-30 in favor of random noise, right? They say that the probability of random noise is 70%, given that Naveed Akram is a known athlete, and the spike is most likely a statistical artifact caused by a handful of sports-related searches in a low-volume region. It gives a probability of 30% to foreknowledge that the digital sweep theory is a valid one. If this was an intelligence operation, the December 9th spike represents the exact moment the agency stepped out of the classified world to verify the suspect's public appearance on the open web. So based on that, I would say, okay, maybe it is just a couple of guys who went down a dark and horrible path and decided to inflict violence on dozens of innocent people. That is, until I saw that there was an immediate effort by Israel to hijack the narrative.
ראינו את הרוע בשפלותו, וראינו גם גבורה יהודית בשיאה. אני ראיתי בדרך הנה סרטון של יהודי שמתנפל על אחד המרצחים, שומט ממנו את הנשק,
So, day of the attack, Bibi immediately goes out and gives a speech where he claimed that he, quote unquote, saw a video of a Jew who pounced on one of the murderers, takes his weapon, and saves who knows how many lives. But anyways, that guy's name has been reported in the media as Ahmed Al-Ahmed, and he's actually Muslim. According to 7 News Australia, which interviewed Al-Ahmed's cousin Mustafa Al-Ahmed, he owns a fruit shop in Sydney and has 2 children. Once again, true hero, and he probably, quite honestly, saved a bunch of lives by taking actions into his own hands. But like I said, the disinformation campaign has already begun. On that note, where is the police? There is a police station, the Bondi police station, situated literally 1 block away from the shooting. So I don't know exactly what happened. Like I mentioned, where was the police in all of this?
Can you tell me what happened?
Yes, there was 2 shooters, one on the bridge, one under the bridge. Just started to shoot for 20 minutes. They shoot, change magazine and just shoot. Simple as that. 20 minutes was 4 policemen there. Nobody give fire back. Nothing. Like they are froze. Like for it looked like 20 minutes, and they shoot. The guy change magazine. I look at him all the time. I was doing my babies under me, and I look at that, and it's just rifle and a pistol, and just shoot.
Would this not be like the worst place to do an attack like this? I would assume or presume that it would be sort of over before it started, or maybe this is a little bit, maybe a conspiracy brain thinking, but could there have been a potential stand down order? I don't know. But something that we do know is that the Mossad is now evidently getting involved.
גורמי ביטחון ישראלים, כולל המוסד, מעורבים בחקירת הפיגוע בסידני, בניסיון לברר האם מישהו עומד מאחורי המחבלים שביצעו את הפיגוע, או שמדובר מה שנקרא במפגעים בודדים שיצאו בוקר אחד לבצע פיגוע מבלי שיש גוף שעומד מאחוריהם. בשלב ראשון, ממה שאנחנו מבינים, מדובר בכל האפשרויות שנמצאות על הפרק, כלומר שמדובר בהתארגנות מקומית, או שאיראן עומדת מאחורי המפגעים הללו, או כפי שדיווח ינון איתך מוקדם יותר היום, שנבדק את האפשרות שחיזבאללה עומד מאחורי המחבלים הללו. כלומר, כרגע באמת צריך לומר, כל האפשרויות נבדקות, כולל האפשרות שאיראן וחיזבאללה הם שעומדות מאחורי
I'm sure they're going to get to the bottom of this. No problem. They have all of our best interests in mind. Trust the Mossad. Allegedly, Mossad sent warnings to Australia about anti-Semitic terror attack risks, which the local police commissioner has denied that there was any intelligence prior to the attack. And Netanyahu is basically now calling for regime change in Australia, quote unquote, lashing out at the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. In a fiery address overnight, Mr. Netanyahu said, quote, anti-Semitism is a cancer and that it spreads when leaders stay silent. I call upon you to replace weakness with action, appeasement with resolve. Instead, Prime Minister, you replace weakness with weakness and appeasement with more appeasement, Mr. Netanyahu said. Here's my problem with this whole thing, okay? So I think most people, okay, I throw myself in this category, reasonable people denounce anti-Semitism. But here's my beef. It's with Israel, right? Specifically, I think in this case, right, it is the government's responsibility overall to protect its people, right? In the case of Bondi Beach, the Australian government should be the ones to step in and to figure out what's going on, and they have a duty to protect its citizens, or else they will face electoral consequences. They don't need Benjamin Netanyahu getting involved. And same goes with America and the American government. It is not, in my opinion, Israel's place to come in and meddle with politics of other countries. Like, why is the Mossad getting involved in this? You know, it's kind of like right after Charlie Kirk was assassinated and Netanyahu came out and said, no, this definitely wasn't us. And then the ex-head of Mossad came out, oh, no, we don't assassinate anybody. It's like, well, who the hell was asking you guys? Why are you getting involved in the action? Nobody said anything about you guys until you did. And look, right now, we don't know exactly what the details are. But something I know for damn sure is that I'm not going to sit idly by and allow the Israeli government and the U.S. government, for that matter, hijack the death of innocent civilians to justify the bombing of other innocent civilians. That is something that I'm not going to stand for. And that's why I think it's so important for us, for all of us, to keep asking questions and also to question all the answers. That is it for me this week. What do you think is going on here? Could this horrific attack be more than just a couple of lone gunmen who have lost their minds? Sound off in the comment section below. If you want to support my journalism, you can become a member.
Well, Candace Owens, the world's preeminent broadcaster, the biggest broadcaster in the whole world, warned us in November that the second week of December was going to be filled with incident. And she encouraged all of her followers, which are many, that they should bookend this tweet. Well, it has been a remarkable second week of December, and it's not over yet. First of all, 3 Americans were killed. Who knew that the Americans were still in Syria in such numbers, in Palmyra? Well, 3 Americans, 2 of them soldiers, one of them a translator, were brutally killed by a security man, formerly at least close to the former head of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, President, I had to choke over that word, President al-Shara Ahmed Jolani. Well, who knows what that was all about? Reports say that the killer of the 3 Americans was about to be sacked, which means he wasn't yet sacked, but was somehow sent on a detail with American service personnel in Syria. Why are Americans still in Syria? Who are they serving? What purpose are they there for? And how many of them are now shooting ducks in the far from festival of light that is today's Syria? Donald Trump promised that there would be condign punishment, but who's going to be punished? If this man, and I've just seen a picture of him, 3 people away from President al-Shara, were rogue elements on behalf of whom, and how many rogue elephants are there operating on the fringes of al-Jolani's ISIS Al-Qaeda government in Damascus? If I was an American, I'd be asking those questions very keenly indeed. But even more keenly, I'd be asking what happened in Brown University in Rhode Island, where the fees are $100,000 a year. $100,000 a year for a university whose principal, who recently, 1 year ago, became a Jew and whose pictures with his husband were all over social media at the height of the slaughter. Who is who and what is what at Brown's University? I'll tell you why I ask. Because for $100,000 a year, you don't even get CCTV in the corridors. The principal didn't know which class had been occupied by apparently a lone gunman who managed to wander the corridors of the university and make his escape to a nearby hotel, where we learn, though nothing else about him have we learned, someone of interest has been picked up. Arrested is the wrong word, apparently. Well, what kind of security is in place at such a prestigious university, which has a very high proportion of Jewish students? Was nobody on guard that day? And if not, why not? And who is the person of interest? What's his name? Where does he come from? These are questions that if I was an American parent with a child at Brown's University, I'd definitely be asking. But on the subject of security, let's turn to the horrific atrocity which took place today at Bondi Beach, where thousands of Jewish citizens, and of course, by the nature of Bondi Beach, many, many others, were gathered on the sands for an open-air Hanukkah festival and picnic, as they were, of course, entirely free to do. But where was the security? 10 minutes, you can see on the screen behind me, for 10 minutes, two men, the only name I know is Navid Akram, a qualified Salafist, that is the kind of strand of Islam professed by Al-Qaeda and ISIS, more of which in a minute, for 10 whole minutes, entirely professionally, using bolt-action firearms with ease, as if they had been doing these kind of shootings all of their lives. Bolt action, not an easy weapon to handle, but handled with ease by the aforementioned Navid Akram. Navid Akram swung to his left, swung to his right, maintained his posture, maintained his shape, and fired repetitively with a bolt-action gun, scores and scores of rounds, aiming deliberately and killing deliberately innocent civilian people in their swimwear on a beach. Now, I don't know who Navid Akram was working for. I don't know if he was working for anyone. So let's deal with what I know first and foremost. He is guilty of an egregious act of mass murder of civilian people on a beach on a religious holiday. No more grave crime can be imagined. No more grave sin can be imagined. So if he really thought that he was doing this on behalf of Islam, surely he will be condemned to eternal torture in hell, in the worst seventh circle of hell. No crime greater, no sin larger than slaughtering innocent people, imagining that you are punishing guilty people. No sin worse than systematically eliminating people on a beach whose names you don't know, whose views you don't know, entirely nihilistic, indiscriminate slaughter. That's what Navid Akram, the Salafist, was doing. If, on the other hand, he was one of the people that Candace Owens warned us about back in November, then I don't know what punishment would be suitable for such a man. I don't know if this was a false flag. I hope that we will, in time, know more about it. But if it was a false flag, then Benjamin Netanyahu would be acting exactly the same as he is acting right at this minute, this hour. Netanyahu is lecturing the Australian government that they are responsible for this because they recognize the Palestinian state. How's that for chutzpah? Netanyahu is claiming he warned Australia that the presence of large numbers of people in Australia who oppose the slaughter, genocide in Gaza was contributing to a set of circumstances that made an event like today, he said, inevitable. Well, there are two ways that it could be inevitable. And one of them is that you organized it. I'm not saying that you did. It's perfectly possible that these fanatic extremists, Salafists, did this all on their own, not working for Israel, but they might as well be. Because, of course, the primary beneficiary of the slaughter on Bondi Beach today is that man, Benjamin Netanyahu. It is he who is the beneficiary. And now the slaughter will surely herald greater crackdowns on Muslims, greater crackdowns on Palestinian solidarity work in Australia, and maybe more widely, for this, of course, has turned into a global phenomenon. If 11 people, 12 people had been shot dead queuing for food in Gaza, you wouldn't even know about it. You wouldn't know the name of a single one of the slaughtered queuing for food in Gaza. If they'd been slaughtered on Gaza's beach rather than Bondi Beach, you wouldn't even know about it. No outlet would even report it, let alone urge you to sympathize with it. It's perfectly possible, though, that these maniacs did this of their own volition.
Donald Trump reacted.
It's perfectly possible that, like 7/7 in London, this perverted, degenerate strand of Islam that on 7/7 slaughtered 52 people on the London Underground and on a London bus, including in the station Whitechapel East that I then represented in Parliament. I saw the bloodied and the dead being carried out of the underground station. These people who committed that act were presumably not carrying out any false flag. They did it of their own volition. So my mind is open as to which of these two possibilities is involved here. But what I reiterate is that if this was a false flag affair, Israel and Netanyahu would not be exploiting it any differently to the way they are exploiting this. The anti-Muslim narrative, of course, unexpectedly, by an act of such heroism as to leave you aghast, the killer on that bridge was disarmed by a 43-year-old Muslim shopkeeper in Sutherland, Sydney, Australia, a fruit shop owner who sells watermelon, who sells strawberries and raspberries, actually jumped on one of the gunmen and disarmed him, and then spared his life, I should say. That was Islam in action, wasn't it? That was a Muslim in action, wasn't it? Remember his name, Ahmed al-Ahmed. Netanyahu called him a Jew who jumped on the back of the gunman and disarmed him. Other Zionist trolls are saying he's a Lebanese Christian called Ahmed al-Ahmad. If you believe that, I've got a bridge in London I could sell you going cheap. This hero is the latest in a long line of Muslim heroes on the scene of such horrific acts of mass murder and terrorism. The railway guard on the train in Huntingdon in England, an Algerian British man who sustained horrific injuries protecting the passengers on the train from a machete-wielding madman who was proceeding from carriage to carriage, committing atrocities. He was released from hospital today, but you didn't know that because no British broadcaster broadcast it. He's already forgotten. Let's make sure that Ahmed al-Ahmad, the hero of Bondi Beach, is not forgotten. He's an Australian national. That makes him eligible for the George Cross. I demand that King Charles decorates him with the highest civilian award in the Commonwealth for a civilian act of bravery. I want to see Ahmed al-Ahmad receive the George Cross in Buckingham Palace. That's a direct demand from the mother of all talk shows to His Majesty King Charles III. So much else is happening in the world. The war apparently is starting in Venezuela. I said the war is starting because I could have chosen any number of them. I could have chosen Iran, where Israel has just accused Iran of being behind the mass murder in Sydney, even though the perpetrator is a Salafist who hates Iran and regards the Shiite branch of the Muslim religion as heretic. If you believe that one, I will sell you a bridge in London going cheap. But of course, Netanyahu needs a casus belli. Netanyahu is itching for a war with Iran. So maybe that's the one we'll be talking about with Chris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize-winning former head of the Middle East Bureau of the New York Times later in this show. Or I could have mentioned some of the wars that Donald Trump boasted he'd ended. I'm not talking about the Armenia, Albania, Azerbaijan, or Azerbaijan. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about Cambodia versus Thailand. There is no ceasefire. Thailand has occupied a city in Cambodia and is bombing using its Royal Air Force Cambodian villages, towns, and cities like old times, isn't it? The Cambodians, who I would argue started this conflict, are fighting back. The war is raging. Donald Trump has made a telephone call, but nobody, it would appear, picked up. But I think the big war that is most likely is the war Donald Trump is threatening in Venezuela. He's murdered people on rubber dinghies, out fishing, or maybe out moving from one country to the next, maybe out for a pleasure cruise. Who knows? Certainly not Donald Trump, certainly not Pete Hegseth, certainly not Admiral whatever his name is, who's now had to take control because the previous admiral resigned rather than commit what are unarguably war crimes, crimes against humanity. They are illegally in Venezuela's waters. They are illegally flying over Venezuelan airspace. And Trump said yesterday, the war on land is starting. It's beginning to look like I was wrong. when I said that I thought it was all a bluff or all a blind to cover something else that might be about to happen. It looks as if Donald Trump really is intending not just to bombard Venezuela, but to put American boots on the ground in what will become, I promise you, a Latin American Vietnam. The boots on the ground will soon be in a coffin in significant numbers. And if I was an American parent, I'd be mighty, mighty concerned about that. It's all coming up here on the Mother.
You know, it's Israel. Israel planning to do a false flag and blame it on Arabs, which is what they've done their whole existence of Israel. That's their main tool, is to do false flags and then blame it on Arabs.
Welcome back. Let's analyze this completely. The world is buzzing about yesterday's attack in Australia. We all know that what is going to happen next. Netanyahu and his government, the evangelical Christians, and Islamophobes like Tommy Robinson and Laura Loomer will start shedding crocodile tears. Jews have become vulnerable to attacks everywhere. In Australia, they were reportedly celebrating Hanukkah near the beach when the two gunmen, both identified as Muslims, opened fire. 15 people were eliminated, including a child. How cruel are the Muslim attackers? These Muslims are a threat to the world. Blah, blah, blah. Of course, they will try with all their might to hide the part of the story where a Muslim man, Ahmad Ali Ahmad, literally risked his life to wrestle one of the attackers only to save so many Jews. Anyway, despite their desire for the world to sympathize with them, this is not currently happening. Instead, they are questioning the incident and blaming it on a false flag operation. Wait, why? Because this attack was predicted by two well-known individuals, Jimmy Dore and Candace Owens. Yes, you heard it correctly. Let's look at a clip from Jimmy Dore's show, which he only uploaded yesterday but may have recorded a few days ago, in which he makes shocking predictions. Let's begin.
So now if there's an attack, if there's some kind of attack or a bomb or whatever that happens in Europe, and they blame it on Hamas, we know it's Israel. That's what this is. And so this is a real article. This is from the Jewish Chronicle. The headline is High Likelihood Hamas Will Attack Europe in the Next 6 Months. Intelligence Report warns. So here's what the headline should be. Israel planning to do a false flag in Europe and blame it on Arabs, which is what they've done their whole the whole existence of Israel. That's their main tool, is to do false flags and then blame it on Arabs. That's what they do. So high likelihood Hamas will attack Europe. It's a high likelihood Israel is planning a false flag attack in Europe to be blamed on Hamas because they've lost the narrative. They've lost the battle for the minds of the people in Europe. They've turned on them. They've lost it. They've lost the argument. They've lost the narrative. And so what do you do when you you do a false flag and you blame it on your enemy.
Now hold on. Did Jimmy Dore just say that there's a possibility of false flag attack in Europe by Israel, which they will blame on Palestinians or Arabs because their narratives have failed miserably, and a false flag attack will rekindle sympathy for them? Now, yes, he mentions Europe, and of course, Australia is not Europe. Maybe he guessed the wrong location, or maybe the perpetrators or planners of the attack changed the location at the last minute as their plan was already exposed by a leading Jewish newspaper. As of now, there has no official confirmation that the attackers were connected to Palestine or any organized resistance group. But let's be honest, how many times we have seen this movie? Maybe tomorrow they will say that after investigation, intelligence sources suggest some connections. Who knows? Jimmy practically wrote the script in advance. And as said before, Jimmy wasn't the only one, because a tweet is also now making rounds everywhere. Candace made a dangerous prediction with the exact time of the second week of December. As we can see, the tweet reads, "There has been signaling that a 9/11 style attack is coming the second week of December. Save this tweet, it will age well." Well, it really did age well, almost too well. How did Candace predict this attack so well? Was she referring to the same attack that occurred yesterday? It does appear so. It appears she knew something no one else did. Jimmy Dore and Candace Owens are not future tellers. Rather, they are analysts who can analyze and identify patterns for the future events. And now we can see what they had warned us about right in front of our eyes.
That's exactly. So let's read a little bit of this. Hamas has spread its influence beyond Gaza across Europe. Isn't it interesting that they say Al Qaeda and ISIS are sworn enemies of the Jewish state, Israel, yet they never attack Israel? Isn't that interesting? They never attack Israel. Isn't that weird? And then also Israel, when ISIS fighters would get wounded fighting in Syria against Assad, they would go to Israel and Israel would take care of them. They would give them medical treatment. Did you know that? They're sworn enemy. So now you know how Israel works now, right? False flags, lies, blackmail. And this is another one. So Hamas has spread its influence beyond Gaza across Europe and into the UK, with the attack outside of Israel led by a terror group likely remain elevated for the foreseeable future. This is according to a report compiled by Western intelligence experts. You know, the same ones who said weapons of mass destruction, you know, those that highlights the looming risk of Hamas-led attack in Europe. The report obtained by the Daily Mirror states Hamas has historically concentrated its operational activities within Israel, Gaza, and West Bank. However, now that we've lost the argument and everybody sees that we're a genocidal, ethno-supremacist apartheid state committing ethnic cleansing, since then, now we got to change the story. And so now, however, collected intelligence over the last decade indicates a deliberate strategic shift toward developing foreign operational capabilities. The authors of the report, who are not identified, note that the Iranian-backed terrorist group has been actively expanding its influence into Europe for some time. European and other intelligence services supported by Israel agencies have repeatedly uncovered early-stage plots, weapons, caches, organized crime connections, and logistics networks designed to support contingency operations. Hamas has expanded into Europe through an intricate network of influence with charities, non-government organizations, and hardcore crime. That sounds exactly like the Zionist Israel project. It sounds exactly like. So again, it's that thing: accuse your enemy of the thing you're guilty of, and that's what the Mossad and Israel and the Zionists do better than anybody. Rather than being discouraged by their near defeat in Gaza, Hamas, the significant blows suffered by Hamas, including the loss of their key leader, has fueled the group's ambitions to spread their terror further. So they'll always have a reason. It never ends. No matter that they've completely flattened and wiped out Gaza and have committed a genocide, they still got to worry about Hamas, not the people committing genocide. Not the people starting wars with Iran.
Islamophobes and Israelis are now crying in every corner about the attack and how anti-Semitic their environment has become. But do you know what the most important question to ask after a major extremist incident is? Who benefits the most and who loses the most? In this attack, even though the savior was Muslim, the focus will remain on the attackers and their religion. That alone tells you something. The biggest beneficiaries, Netanyahu and his government, they will get an opportunity to resume their attacks on Muslims, and the world will nod along. While ordinary Muslims, particularly those in Western countries and in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, will suffer the most as a result of this attack. However, this operation did not proceed entirely as intended, because it's hard to deny that a Muslim man saved Jewish lives. A father of two, unarmed, risked his life to save many Jews. No one knows how many Jews he saved yesterday. The single act disrupted the clean narrative. It complicated their planning and made the propaganda messy, which is probably why it's being quietly sidelined.
The organization leadership now appears more willing to accept the strategic risks of external operations, the report says, by anonymous people. If Hamas sustains further attrition, external operations may grow in relative importance within the group strategy. Okay. So we know that. So now if there's an attack, if there's some kind of attack or a bomb or whatever that happens in Europe, and they blame it on Hamas, we know it's Israel. That's what this is. And if you want to see how nobody believes this, so when they tweeted this out, so there's the tweet. High likelihood Hamas will attack Europe in the next 6 months. That's from the Jewish Chronicle. Do you see the ratio? So it got 2.4 million. Oh, let me make this bigger. So it got 2.4 million views. It got barely over 500 likes. This is on their own Twitter feed. 2.4 million views. It got 2.6 thousand comments. So that is quite a rate. That's like a 4-to-1 ratio.
Well, look at Adam right below. It literally no one fell for this.
Adam,
He gets 3.6 likes.
He got 3.6 thousand likes. Literally no one fell for this. How is this tweet going for you? Says our friend of the show, Tad Hickey. Nice job. Or Tig. I'm sorry, Tig. And he ratioed them too. Everybody's ratioing them in their own comments. How's this tweet going for you? It's hilarious.
So was this a false flag? We don't know. However, considering the warnings from Jimmy Dore and Candace Owens, it appears to be a false flag. What is your opinion on this incident? Do you think it was a false flag operation, or was it genuinely a terror attack on Jews? Let us know your thoughts.
And
Professor, it's a pleasure to speak to you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Mario.
Pleasure. Would love to get your initial reaction to the horrific shooting we saw in Australia. Already your government, the Iranian government, has condemned the attack. I've got a statement here by I think by your spokesperson. He said, it was relatively quickly, we condemn the violent attack in Sydney, Australia. The assassination and killing of human beings, wherever it occurs, is reprehensible and condemned.
Yes, of
Professor?
course. Of course. I think the Iranians were very swift this time around because the government is gradually learning how fast the Western media works to the benefit of the Israeli regime. We already see the Israeli regime making outlandish accusations, trying to blame Iran. Since this is a recorded interview, we don't know, maybe in the next few hours there'll be more information, but from what we're already seeing, one of the culprits, apparently, his background is Salafi Wahhabi. If that is true, then that points to allies of the United States. The United States has been, and the Israeli regime, they've traditionally been supporting ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Their allies in the region promote Wahhabism and Salafism and Takfiri ideology. And so when you combine that with the immediate accusations made by the Israeli regime, well, it makes one wonder.
Yeah, so this is what I want to, where we'll disagree, because I agree with you. I've seen the comments about the potential Salafi affiliation. I think anyone blaming Iran is just trying to use this to their advantage to advance their agenda. But I also saw your tweet. You quote tweeted someone saying, breaking Iran is behind the attack in Australia, and you quote tweeted saying, the more they say it, the more I believe Mossad did it. And you also retweeted another person who said, we believe Israel is behind the Sydney attack. And that person was quote tweeting someone else saying, do you think Iran is behind the Sydney attack? So my question to you, Professor, is do you genuinely think the Mossad could be behind this attack? Or are you just being critical and mocking people that are blaming Iran? I think there's a big difference between the two.
No, I wouldn't put anything beyond Mossad and the Israeli regime. On October the 7th, when Hamas was taking the prisoners or hostages back to Gaza, we know that the Israeli regime carried out the Hannibal Directive, and it did not admit this, and it killed large numbers of people. Also, regardless of who was behind 9/11, we saw 19, apparently it's established, confirmed, that 19 of them were Saudi, Emirati, I think Lebanese, and mostly Saudi, 15, I think, Saudi. But we know that, for example, the airlines and the banking stocks, the banks that were in the building, people sold their stocks right before the attack, and the United States never said who sold the stocks, and therefore there were people who knew. I don't know who they are, but if you look at Tucker Carlson's documentary, I haven't watched all of it, but the bits and pieces that I have, obviously some people knew. So it could be terrorists from Saudi Arabia, for example, that carried out 9/11, but it could also be a broader conspiracy. So a regime that carries out genocide, a regime that bombs hospitals, a regime that pulls the plug on incubators in hospitals and murders tiny infants, it can do anything.
So this
Mario,
is where
Mario, can I interject there? Okay.
I'll ask one more question to the professor, and I'll go to you, Michael. So this is where I think it's very fair to question everything, question every narrative. But I think there's also a lot of people that are trying to just blame Israel on every single event that happens. Whenever anything happens, they try to find a link to Israel. The Venezuelan potential regime change by the US, I've seen people posting that Israel's requesting the US to attack Venezuela and change the regime because Maduro is critical of Israel. Charlie Kirk was assassinated, a lot of people pointing to Israel. Obviously, September 11th, there's a lot of questions that are unanswered. But don't you find it unfair? And if you go now to Australia, would you really believe that Israel will pay two Muslims, one of them potentially Salafi, to go there and shoot innocent Jews in Australia, in a sovereign country?
Mario, for almost 50 years now, every accusation in the book has been directed towards Iran. The most outrageous,
which I disagree with. I disagree with as well.
The most outrageous and outlandish, and no one has ever complained about it. So suddenly, for us to say, "Oh, poor Israel," the Israeli regime is a genocidal regime. So I haven't said that they've carried out every conspiracy in the world. You say some people said this, some people said that. I'm saying that this raises questions. When the Israeli regime immediately starts saying it was Iran, and the Australian media is also trying to pin the blame on Iran, then it raises serious questions.
The Australian media mentioned Iran. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yes, apparently the Australian media has been implying that somehow there's some link to Iran, or at least parts of the media.
Yeah.
From what
I
I've
find
seen
that to
online.
be, I find that to be pretty ridiculous as well. Just to be clear.
But the point, Mario, is that, and I'm doing a weekly monologue on Al Mayadeen, where people can see it's about demystifying Iran, and people can see it on Mayadeen English, the English version, both on YouTube and Twitter and elsewhere, because for 50 years now, all sorts of nonsense has been attributed to Iran. But Iran is the side that is fighting against this genocide, and the collective West is supporting the Israeli regime carrying out the genocide. So when it comes to morality, yes, I think that there is no morality in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and the regime is utterly corrupt and despicable, and therefore it can do anything. Does that mean that I'm saying they carried out the attack? No, I have no idea who carried out the attack. But the more they insist that Iran did it, the more questions are raised in my mind about the role of the Israeli regime. Again, 9/11. For many years, I personally distanced myself from people, for many years, from people who raise questions about 9/11. But now I'm seeing that I was being, I thought these people were, crazy conspiracy theorists, but now I'm looking and I'm seeing that actually there is some strange, very strange things that happened on 9/11. So yes, when it comes to the Israeli regime, when it comes to the CIA, I don't trust them at all.
Michael, you're jumping in?
Yeah, I think this is where we land on a certain conundrum, because the gentleman said nobody cares when outlandish claims have been made about Iran for the past 50 years, so why not just make outlandish claims about Israel? Speaking for myself, I have objected when outlandish claims have been made about Iran, or when Iran's culpability has been capriciously declared for any number of disparate events. Case in point is in 2024, when the Department of Justice in the United States released a ridiculous indictment purporting that Iran had been behind an assassination attempt on Donald Trump by somehow recruiting these low-level, I think it was Puerto Ricans or black people in New York City to orchestrate an assassination attempt. I mean, it was laughable. And that's just one example of many, because obviously those outlandish claims are made oftentimes by Israeli and American officials in service of generating a consensus in favor of sanctions against Iran, or even military action against Iran, as we saw last June. But to just present the mirror image
just before you,
hold on.
Continue. Just before you continue.
Michael, let's go, Michael.
No, just wait.
Give you back the mic.
Because you said, you misquoted me. I did not say at all. And anyone can go back to the beginning of what I said earlier and find out that you're misquoting me. I did not say that since for almost 5 decades, outlandish claims were made about Iran. Therefore, we can make outlandish claims about the Israeli regime. What I'm saying is that those people are suddenly worried or upset about all these accusations made about the Israeli regime. Where were they when all those ridiculous claims were being made against Iran? Whereas the Israeli regime is a genocidal regime, and it does anything. When you pull the plug on incubators, when you pull the plug on infants, how much worse can you get than that? How much worse can you get than that?
Okay,
So
fine. I'm willing to grant.
They're willing to do that, then I'm saying it's not beyond my imagination to believe that, yes, they could do that. Yes, of course, I believe they could, just like they carried out the Hannibal Directive.
Okay, I'm happy to grant that you're going to be able to identify inconsistencies in terms of certain people's willingness to fling outlandish claims vis-a-vis Iran when they're reticent to do so or intolerant of such claims vis-a-vis Israel. There's no doubt there's certain inconsistency, but let's leave aside the more meta point, right, and just look at the substance here, because I can only speak for myself. And, Mario read some of your tweets from just today where you do say, you seem to endorse the idea that we believe Israel is behind the Sydney attack, where you say the more that they say it, the more I believe Mossad did it. This to me is reminiscent.
The more who says it.
The more, I know you said they, I mean, you didn't really specify.
Well,
but,
you didn't look at who I was retweeting.
Can I complete my point? And then I'm happy
well,
to have
you're making an
okay,
accusation.
But please let me finish my point, and then you can respond, okay? This to me, in general, is reminiscent of a mentality or an attitude that we too often see, where because there are legitimate grievances that people across the world, whether Muslims or whomever, have toward Israel with respect to its conduct in Gaza, its incursions in Lebanon, Syria, you name it, their influence in the United States in terms of affecting domestic policy. There's, of course, myriad reasons why people might have well-founded grievances or criticisms of Israel. But then it goes a little off the rails when allowed to fester in this kind of milieu of kind of reflexive knee-jerk conspiracism, where Mario is correct that there is a tendency to just attribute everything that goes wrong in the world now to Israel as though that should just be taken as granted. And I think that contributes.
What you are saying is totally, what you are saying is totally irrelevant, because you do not even know what I was retweeting. And so you are taking a sentence without understanding the context.
I have the screenshots right in front of me.
Michael, let him please. Michael,
I was responding to an Israeli newspaper that was saying Iran was most likely, or I don't remember exactly.
I mean, you seem to be responding to just some slop account that didn't even verify this quote.
No, and by the way in which you depict what the Israelis are doing in Gaza, grievances, or in the outrageous murders that is carrying out in Lebanon. Today they murdered 3 Lebanese. Every day they're murdering people in Gaza. Since the ceasefire, almost 400 Palestinians in Gaza have been murdered. And you call these grievances? You are downplaying what this genocidal regime does, and you are misrepresenting what I said. I said the more that the Israeli regime insists that it is Iran who carried it out, the more I question what really happened, especially since ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they were Western creations.
That's a totally inane semantic nitpick.
Since the ideology behind ISIS and Al-Qaeda was produced by oil and gas-rich regimes in the Persian Gulf at the behest of the United States, Boko Haram as well, and all these other extremist groups. And where do these people kill people usually? In Iran, in Russia, every now and then, maybe once in Paris or London, but never in Israel. In Australia, but never in Israel. They kill Hamas.
Okay, Mario.
Never in Israel.
Professor, I've got a question. I want to go through Netanyahu's statement, Prime Minister Netanyahu, which was not long after the shooting happened.
I have to respond to the claims.
We'll go back. We'll go back to it, Michael. I promise we'll go back to it. I'm not sure. Have you read the statement, Professor? Essentially, he blames Australia's recognition of the Palestinian state as a reason for the attacks, of not protecting Jews in the country. He says he wrote the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister Albanese, quote, "Your call for a Palestinian state fuels anti-Semitic fire. It rewards Hamas terrorists. It emboldens those who menace Australian Jews and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets." Your comments on the statement by the Prime Minister?
Well, first of all, he and his gang, they are the most anti-Semite people on this planet. First of all, the Palestinians are Semites. And where is he from? He's from Poland. And he, through this genocide, he and his allies, and all those who support the genocide, and by trying to attribute this to Judaism, is the enemy of Judaism. Because Jews in the United States and across the world, in very large numbers, are utterly against what the Zionist regime is doing. Large numbers. I don't know the percentage. I don't know the polls right now, but large numbers. All of my Jewish friends.
You're talking about Jews outside of Israel?
Overwhelmingly outside. Inside Israel, I've seen the polls. Israel, I've seen the polls. And even inside Israel, there's a minority who are opposed to this. But outside Israel, we saw that many of the student leaders in the protests that were crushed by the United States and elsewhere, they were Jews. So by trying to equate Zionism with Judaism, he's being anti-Semite, assuming that we equate being Semite to Judaism, which that's not true. He's one example himself. But more importantly, the Israeli regime is blaming people across the world, is trying to shame people from opposing a genocide by trying to pretend that opposing genocide means support for terrorism. ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Mario, during the Syrian dirty war, they had bases alongside the Golan Heights. They had positions there. Their terrorists were treated in Israeli hospitals. People can check this online. They were given ammunition by the Israeli regime. And of course, the American link, General Michael Flynn himself spoke about how U.S. ally and the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency wrote a document on this in 2012 when General Michael Flynn was the head of the agency. It said that U.S. allies in the region are trying to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq, and that was ISIS.
In an effort to weaken Assad in Syria.
That's right. For whatever reason. And then Secretary of State Kerry, in a leaked audio, said that we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus. We know Jake Sullivan, when he was working for Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, wrote an email to her saying, in Syria, in February the 12th, 2012, in Syria, Al-Qaeda is on our side. And the same was true in Libya, and the same was true in Afghanistan during the dirty war and the war between the Soviet Union and the U.S. and its allies, where they sacrificed Afghanistan. These two.
So you think funding those extremist groups, which might have made military strategic sense, have played a role in what people call globalized intifada or the Islamist extremists that are conducting attacks? I'm using a word, but I use by other words. Outside. It is
Intifada is a resistance and a legitimate resistance by the Palestinian people against its oppressor, a Palestinian people who've been expelled from their land. The people of Gaza, most of them are refugees. They lived in Palestine, just like the people in Syria, the Palestinians there, in Lebanon and Jordan and in Egypt. They were expelled from their lands. They still have the keys to their homes. The Intifada has nothing to do with ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
So I'll replace the word. What I meant is the Islamic extremist attacks. So I apologize for using the word Intifada. The Islamic extremist attacks that we've seen in Australia.
I wouldn't even call them Islamic. When these terrorist organizations were funded by family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, oil and gas-rich dictatorships that follow the ideology of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, at the behest of the United States, then that's American Islam extremism. That's CIA Islam. That's not Islamic extremism.
You will call it an unintended consequence of that strategy in the Middle East?
At the best, that would be blowback. If we do not believe that there are intelligence agencies involved, that would be the best case scenario. That because of Western support for these extremists, we are seeing these terrorist attacks. Because the West has allowed countries in our region to fund Wahhabism and Salafism for their own strategic interests across the globe. We know that. Everyone knows that. It's
one
not
more
a secret. Wahhabism and Salafism was an obscure ideology in Najd in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar. Because of oil and gas wealth, it became much bigger. And the United States used this as a weapon against the Soviet Union, and then later on in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria. It's obvious, it's clear as day. And we know that these groups have never attacked the Israeli regime. So when we speak about these extremists, these are extremists that the Americans created. It's just like and again, this is going to get some people angry, in Ukraine, regardless of whose side you're on in the war in Ukraine, there is no doubt that in 2014, neo-Nazis and extremists were supported by the United States. Before 2014, these very same neo-Nazis and fascists, they were being critiqued in Western media. And then after 2014, the tone changed completely. So the United States, when it wants to confront Russia, they are willing to use neo-Nazis. They're willing to use Contra-fascists in Nicaragua. And in our region, they're willing to use ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And in our region, without a doubt, the United States does not do anything without the support of the Israeli regime. 1 million people in Iraq were murdered because Netanyahu and the likes of Netanyahu were pushing for regime change in Iraq. So when they're willing to lie about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which is no less than a false flag operation, then of course they're willing to do anything.
Michael, I think this is an area where you and the professor would agree. Getting your reaction to Netanyahu's statement, blaming the recognition of a Palestinian state for the attacks we saw, the horrific acts we saw yesterday in Australia. Your response to that, and then maybe also you can comment on how big of a role do you think the U.S. foreign policy or Western foreign policy in the Middle East played in those attacks that we're seeing globally, not only in the last year, but it's been now decades?
Yeah, much of what he just spelled out there, I wouldn't disagree with. Just before this interview, Mario and I conducted an interview with a former Israeli spokesman, IDF spokesman, Jonathan Conricus, and Conricus, sorry. And among the things that I pressed him on were this statement from Netanyahu today, trying to attribute the attack in Australia to the Australian government's recent recognition of a Palestinian state. However, sort of inconsequential or symbolic that recognition was, Netanyahu saw fit to at least nominally try to blame that government policy for the attack today in Australia. And of course, that's wildly fallacious. So I pressed the former Israeli government spokesperson, who's now subsidized by a hawkish American think tank, on that very point. But
so what do you think?
Attack,
Michael, what do you think? What do you think is the reason that inspired those people, in your opinion, from the information we have so far? Do you think it's the war in Gaza? Is it the obviously you disagree with the Prime Minister's statement, or is it deeper than that?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, we saw that attack in Washington, D.C. in May, where there was a non-Muslim, but seemingly a leftist of some sort, who conducted an attack on a function that was held by the Israeli consulate, killed 2 people, and was very forthright about his motives, which is that he said he did it for Gaza. He put out a full manifesto stating as much. He pulled out a kafia. So there wasn't much doubt as to his motives. And there's also not much doubt that the Israeli pulverization campaign has produced global blowback, which very foreseeably has led to these individualized instances of public violence, whether it was in DC in May or potentially this attack that was just conducted in Australia, which is why I do have to say that I resent being upbraided by the professor for somehow mischaracterizing the grievances, he objected to that term, that people have as a result of the images that have been coming out so relentlessly as to the Gaza pulverization campaign. That's how I describe it. I have always described it, a pulverization campaign, which very predictably can lead to the kind of blowback that we're seeing here. My problem is when those legitimate grievances, and I don't know why you would object to that term other than to do a semantic kind of inane nitpick, when those legitimate grievances get fallaciously channeled into this knee-jerk paranoid conspiracism that we see very overrepresented on the internet in particular, such that any event in the world that seems to be negative is immediately attributed to Israel groundlessly, because you know what that does in part? Not only does it just create like hysteria and stupidity in general, it also crowds out a rational critique of Israel's conduct and U.S. support for Israel and the many other things that have given rise to these legitimate grievances. So that's why I object when people just willy-nilly will say, oh, Charlie Kirk was killed by Israel. I'm not saying the professor did, I don't know. Or Jeffrey Epstein was running a Mossad honeypot, or now the Australian attack was conducted by, it's plausible based on nothing that maybe Mossad was behind this Australian attack, because it's just a mirror image of the same kind of, I think, reckless and unintelligent rhetoric that often comes from
I'll let you get a glass of water.
Pro-Israel people who are blaming Iran for everything.
Since you are co-host, I think it's really appropriate for you to let me speak more, because you can speak every day, all day together on your. I'm only going to be here for a few minutes, so if I could respond.
Of course, I'll let you respond, Professor. Do you mind if Michael, Professor, can I ask you a question with a response?
No, let me quickly respond to what he said. First of all, yes, I do not think that pulverization is an adequate term. At the very beginning of the genocide in Gaza, the Israeli regime, its leaders, and anyone can go and look at the South African complaint at the ICJ, it's online. They spoke of their intention for genocide. The language, the wording was clear. They spoke about no innocence in Gaza. They spoke about cutting off the water, medicine, supplies, food. They said all these things. They spoke on multiple occasions about Amalek, and we know what that meant: killed the kids, killed the animals, killed the women. So it's not pulverization, it's genocide. It's genocide. The intent was genocide, and God knows how many people died. We don't know even how many people are dying right now of disease, for reasons that are linked to this, but it will never directly be. Later on, it'll come out because the numbers and statistics will show to a large degree how many people actually died. But it's a genocide. It was the intention for genocide, and it's a genocide. However, to the second point that you made, no, you cannot say that. So people should not. First of all, not everything is being attributed to the Israeli regime, but you know as well as I that the Israeli regime's influence in Washington is second to none. And therefore, the Israeli regime, its voice is definitely heard when it comes to Venezuela, when it comes to Libya, when it comes to Iraq, when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Lebanon, and across the board. There's no doubt about that. And Epstein, you seem to be implying that Epstein didn't have anything to do with the Mossad. I find that unbelievable, because what Epstein was doing for so many years, there is no way in the world that it was under the radar. There is no way at all that I can believe that it was under the radar. Definitely the FBI knew, definitely the CIA knew, and definitely the Mossad knew. There's no doubt about that.
Knew
Whether
what?
Trump
Michael,
knew,
hold on, Michael.
whether Trump was a part of it, I have no idea. Whether some other, I don't know the details. Maybe it'll come out, maybe it won't come out.
Right, that's a
But
problem.
there's
Lack of
no
knowledge of
doubt
the details.
that Epstein was, and I'm sure they have many other Epsteins. And I tell all pro-Palestinian activists across the world, be careful, because these people will try to find evidence on you, make you do something illegal, get footage of you, and then use it against you to silence you. So people across the world should worry about this little Epsteins, the big Epsteins, but that Epstein, without a doubt, was working with these intelligence agencies.
So, Professor, I've got one last question for you, because we're past our time. There's a post going around that Al-Aqsa TV had footage of one of the victims of the shooting. His name is Rabbi Eli Schlanger, and he was killed in that massacre that we saw. And the post included photos of the rabbi interacting with Israeli soldiers, claiming he, quote, assisted Israel's war of annihilation. And Hamas allegedly celebrated his death. I want to get your take on this. Do you condemn the killing of every person in that shooting, including that rabbi, if it was true that he was praising the IDF soldiers during the Gaza war?
I don't know what was on Al-Aqsa TV. I'm not going to comment about that at all. I condemn, as everyone does, any act of terrorism in any country across the world. But anyone who supports the Zionist regime and its genocide anywhere in the world should be ashamed of himself or herself. That is not a respectable person. But within Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, within the 1967 borders, across the board, Palestinians are slaves. They're under occupation. And just like the French resistance fought against the Nazis and at times may have committed crimes, you cannot condemn the slave who is fighting against its oppressor. So whatever happens in Palestine, the real culprit is those who are carrying out genocide, and they've been doing it for decades, those who are imposing apartheid, those who are carrying out ethnic cleansing, they're the main culprits. But any crime anywhere in Palestine, if, let's say, some Palestinian kills some kid, some Israeli kid, of course that's unacceptable. But that is not going to change the equation at all. The slave is the victim, not the oppressive Zionists.
Professor, pleasure to speak to you again, sir. Thank you for your time. Michael, thanks a lot for joining. Thank you, gentlemen.
Australia's Bondi Beach in Sydney has shocked the world. We all woke up to this news in the Western world today as we learned that as many as 11 people have been killed in this gruesome attack. The attack coincided with the members of the Jewish communities celebrating their festival. As expected, the usual suspects from the settler colony of Israel to the UK and Australia have been quick to link this attack to those protesting against the Israeli genocide in Gaza.
Yeah. What's your view? Because we've heard from other Jewish people living in Australia this morning, they don't think enough has been done up to now.
My view is really clear. They're very much playing it safe and they pay a lot of lip service. And I've been told that the actual police who are witnessing death threats and chants at, like I have to call it what it is, pro-Palestinian rallies, when they hear death to Jews, gas the Jews, and from the river to the sea, which is a clear directive of kill Jews worldwide. Globalize the Intifada means kill Jews wherever you are.
This is what makes everything suspicious, and I shall attempt to explain how. So much so that war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu was quick to peddle fake news by claiming that the Muslim man who risked his life to snatch the gun from one of the shooters was actually a Jew.
ראינו את הרוע בשפלותו, וראינו גם גבורה יהודית בשיאה. אני ראיתי בדרך הנה סרטון של יהודי שמתנפל על אחד המרצחים, שומט ממנו את הנשק, ומציל מי יודע כמה נפשות.
Of course, terrorist Netanyahu had no option but to later correct himself, admitting that the hero was indeed a Muslim and not a Jew.
And the result is the horrific attacks on Jews we saw today. We saw an action of a brave man, turns out a Muslim brave man, and I salute him, that stopped one of these terrorists from killing innocent Jews.
Look, any attack targeting innocent civilians is a tragedy. It's wrong. It must be condemned unequivocally, period. There are no ifs and no buts. You can simply never justify such attacks, whether the victims are Palestinians in Gaza or Jews in Australia. However, I have a problem with those who condemn the Bondi Beach shooting but were either justifying the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians or look the other way when Israeli terrorists from the IDF carried out the biggest ever Holocaust in Gaza for generations. I and many like me have every effing moral right to condemn this attack because we have condemned the mass murder of Palestinians by Israeli terrorists. You don't, because your disgusting habit of cherry-picking your victims wouldn't work anymore. Let's now return to the story itself. According to reports and viral videos, at least 2 gunmen carried out a mass shooting at Australia's Bondi Beach while Jews celebrated their festival. The carnage continued for several minutes and was captured on camera as well. One of the shooters was reportedly shot dead by the Australian Federal Police, while the second attacker had been taken into custody. The video of the shooting is quite disturbing, and therefore I have decided not to reproduce it here. You can watch the entire video on our Telegram channel. Details are on the screen. These videos also captured a rare moment of extraordinary courage displayed by a Muslim man who risked his life to snatch the gun from one of the shooters. I mean, this was truly heroic. You really need extraordinary courage to pull off such a heroic act. The man who did this has been identified as 43-year-old Australian Ahmad Al-Ahmad, seemingly an Australian Muslim of Arab origin. Just imagine how many more innocent people, Jewish people, could have been killed if this hero hadn't snatched the gun from the shooter. He deserves the highest award for bravery by the Australian government. This also demolishes the smear campaign already unleashed by right-wing thugs and pro-genocide Zionists in Europe and America that blamed Muslims and unchecked immigration for such a crime. War criminal Netanyahu was quick to declare that the brave Muslim man who saved so many lives was actually a Jew, as he attributed it to Jewish bravery. Maybe he was reading from a pre-decided script which wasn't matching with the actual development. I genuinely thought that the entire Western media would now leave no stone unturned to prove that the brave Muslim hero was a Jew, just to prove the Israeli masters right. But credit to social media, their nefarious design was busted on this occasion. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese issued a powerful statement condemning this attack.
This afternoon, there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated on this attack on our way of life. There is no place for this hate, violence and terrorism in our nation. Let me be clear, we will eradicate it. Amidst this vile act of violence and hate will emerge a moment of national unity where Australians across the board will embrace their fellow Australians of Jewish faith at this dark moment for our nation.
But this didn't stop many on social media from raising questions on the motive behind today's shooting. One user produced this stunning video using Google trending data on breaking news, and it blew my mind away. You can watch it for yourself here.
So this is actually insane. The Bondi shooting just happened, and just go to Google Trends and you will see the name Naveed Akram of the shooter with the ID that has been seen at the scene. His name was searched in Israel this morning at 1 a.m. 12 times, and last night at 12 a.m. Another 10 times, Naveed Akram. They had also searched him in Iran, which he's suspected to be from, last night as well. So you see 100+ searches December 14th, but at 9 a.m. Now, this attack didn't happen at 9 a.m., did it? So this is very suspect. Or more than 100 searches for his name. And previous to today, his name was never searched in the past months. This is today in Australia. You can see searches coming up all today. But let's go to the past 7 days. 0, 0, 0 results, 0 results. Oop, 1 result at 5 a.m. today. Guys, what the fuck is going on? False flag attack. Or what do you think? It's United States. Oop, 2 searches this morning at 7 a.m. and then a spike of searches. Guys, I think you know what this means.
One user asked Twitter AI Grok to see if the time difference between Tel Aviv and Sydney was indeed matching as claimed in this video. Grok agreed. The user then asked Grok further to be specific as he wrote this, and I quote, "Damn, so if people search the name of the shooter at 9 a.m. in Tel Aviv, what time was it in Sydney, Australia? How could have searched the shooter's name before it happened?" End quote. Grok replied, and I quote, 9 a.m. in Tel Aviv is 6 p.m. in Sydney, about 47 minutes before the Bondi Beach shooting at 6:47 p.m. local time. Then it went on to explain, no confirmed reports of prior searches for shooter Naveed Akram in Tel Aviv. If true, it could be a data glitch, leak, or coincidence. Claims like this often stem from unverified trends. End quote. Australia has had a history of false flags when it comes to attacks on the Jewish community or its interests. Remember this story from March this year. We had woken up to a news claiming an attempt to blow up a synagogue using a high amount of explosives. As it turned out, the Australian Federal Police discovered that this was a false flag and people sitting outside Australia had hired local criminals for this purpose. Thank God police had busted the gang even before they could carry out this attack. On another occasion, last year, a gunman had killed multiple people at Sydney Mall. A serial fake news peddler from UK's Channel 4 program, Countdown, Rachel Riley, had led the pack in blaming Muslims for this attack. This is what she had tweeted, and I quote, "For 6 months now, people have been out on our streets proudly calling for Intifada revolution," whatever it means. "If you want to know what globalized the Intifada looks like, see the Sydney Mall," end quote. Clearly, the attempt was to delegitimize the protest against the Israeli genocide in Gaza. I'm not surprised that same attempts are being made even today after today's attacks. As for Riley, her post had earned her global condemnation and shame, particularly after police in Sydney named the attacker as Joel Gauci, a 40-year-old man from Queensland, and said they did not believe it to be terror-related. This Riley woman had to issue a public apology and delete her tweet. As expected, Channel 4 refused to take her off from its show. Such a punishment only applies to Muslims, Arabs, or people of color. That's the new definition of Western civilization and the justice system. Then in January this year, the Australian police confirmed that they were investigating whether overseas actors or individuals were paying local criminals to carry out anti-Semitic crimes in the country. Don't take my word for it. This is a report from the BBC, a well-known pro-Israeli UK media outlet. In October this year, an Australian parliamentary panel, yes, Australian parliamentary group, was told that New South Wales police had wrongly categorized a significant number of attacks as anti-Semitic. This was because they also included anti-Palestinian graffiti and verbal abuse of pro-Palestine protesters as anti-Semitic, giving a false sense of rise in hate against the Jewish community. In fact, Netanyahu kind of admitted today to playing his part in this dirty game when he said this.
On August 17th, about 4 months ago, I sent Prime Minister Albanese of Australia a letter in which I gave him warning that the Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia. I wrote, "Your call for a Palestinian state pours fuel on the anti-Semitic fire. It rewards Hamas terrorism. It emboldens those who menace Australian Jews and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets. Anti-Semitism is a cancer. It spreads when leaders stay silent. It retreats when leaders act. I call upon you to replace weakness with action, appeasement with resolve. Instead, Prime Minister, you replaced weakness with weakness and appeasement with more appeasement. Your government did nothing to stop the spread of anti-Semitism in Australia. You did nothing to curb the cancer cells that were growing inside your country. You took no action. You let the disease spread. And the result is the horrific attacks on Jews we saw today.
Isn't he actually saying that he was upset by Australia's decision to recognize Palestine as an independent state and therefore had warned Albanese that Australia will have to pay for it? What's your interpretation of this video? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section. It seems to me that Israeli actors have singled out Australia for such dirty activities in a bid to defame the country and have the ruling class on their side by playing their usual victim card. The Israeli lobby has already captured the US, the UK, and most of Europe, and therefore don't need to walk that hard here. Testament to this is when police in Birmingham banned hooligans from Maccabi Tel Aviv Football Club. The whole of the political class in the UK, including the Prime Minister, throw their collective might to reverse the decision. And the campaign continues even today, 2 months after the match. Australia, it seems, is the only unoccupied territory in the Western world for the Israeli lobby. Whatever the case, the Australian police must dig deeper to find out the real actors behind today's gruesome attacks. Whoever is responsible for this ghastly act must not be spared, regardless of whether they are Muslims, Christians, or Jews. A terrorist is a terrorist and should be dealt like one. That's it from me. Thank you very
around 18,000 known and suspected terrorists that the Biden administration let come into our country. These are individuals who under normal circumstances would never be allowed to enter our country because of their ties to jihadi groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Yet the Biden administration not only let them into the country, and in many cases facilitated their entry into the country.
And with that being said, the Trump administration is now saying, prepare yourself for a terrorist attack with these 18,000 terrorists that were allowed in here. Again, they blame it all on Biden and the Biden regime. Why aren't they arrested? Why aren't they in jail? It's just point the finger at the guy that was in here before and just blame it all on him with no repercussions. It's what it is every single day. They're ramping up these attacks. When they start to telegraph and warn you ahead of time that stuff's going to go down, you should prepare that something's going to go down. It's part of the rules to the game. They're definitely not going to come out and say, oh, get ready for something, and nothing happened. Okay? Something big is about to go down. You can tell. You can feel it in the air. All these events that are popping off at different places, they're trying to connect some of these shootings like what happened at Brown, what happened in Bondi in Australia, to terrorism connected to these Muslim groups. There's already staged aspects to those. I'm going to break them down on the live stream because they're going for the guns in Australia immediately, like right after all this stuff. It's pretty obvious. Problem, reaction, solution, and the government always taking the same route. So Tulsi Gabbard also going on Fox News saying the same thing, saying that we've got a tremendous amount of people here illegally and that they have all the information that something is about to happen. It seemed the stage is set for them to do something, and it would slow the United States down, and it would allow any other country like China or whoever else to advance on the world stage if we were slowed down whatsoever. We always warn about an EMP, lights out type of event, all these on the table still as they're warning of a major terrorist attack. Could be a series of events. I just want to make sure people are vigilant, got their head on a swivel, are paying attention to their surroundings, especially if you're out there in a holiday type of event, like a parade or anything like that out there, something that could be top of the list to be targeted. So that is some of the latest. Join me for the live stream Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9 p.m.
And where this entire war came from. It did not come from Bashar al-Assad. It came from Washington. There was a decision in 2011 to overthrow Assad. Actually, that came from Jerusalem. This has been a desire of the Israeli government that stretches back more than 25 years. Netanyahu's idea is make the Middle East in Israel's image, overthrow every government that opposes Israel. He's had a friend in that, and that is the CIA and the United States government. So this war in Syria did not come from Assad's repression. It did not come from Assad's dictatorship. This war came from a presidential order by Obama to overthrow Assad starting in the spring of 2011. We have a name for this program. It was Operation Timber Sycamore. The United States, together with other countries in this region, trained fighters, especially jihadists, including the ones that just took power, to overthrow the regime. This created chaos. 600,000 dead in Syria in a war that has gone on for 14 years. The outcome of this war is what the CIA wanted back in 2011, which is that a jihad group would take power in Syria after being armed by the United States. The Syrian war is just one of 6 wars that Israel has promoted, including in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. We had the list, actually, from Wesley Clark back in 2001 when he was handed a paper in the Pentagon that the goal was 7 wars in 5 years. The only war that hasn't taken place yet, to Netanyahu's great consternation, is the US war with Iran, which Israel is still trying to instigate to this very day.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syrian Analysis. I'm your host, Kirk Almasian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's special live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching this on YouTube or on Rumble. And also, thank you, Johan, and for moderating the live chat, and probably our friend Red Access would join also. Later, one of our commentators asked the question, how do they let Jeffrey Sachs in these meetings even after he says all this? So this is very important question, and I think Jeffrey Sachs, when he said or he spoke about the Syrian case, Operation Timber Sycamore, he was in the Antalya Diplomatic Forum, and they usually invite him because he says the correct things about Palestine, Gaza, and Israel, but they don't like what he says about Syria. So during this meeting, if you watch the entire event and also the Q&A with Jeffrey Sachs, it was quite obvious that the organizers of this event had planted a journalist who works for a Qatari paid newspaper in the crowd, who came across and asked the spontaneous question about the agency of the Syrian people. And he tried to corner Jeffrey Sachs by saying, this is what the Syrian people want, and you are basically going against the will of the Syrian people. And Jeffrey Sachs said, he said, I'm not discussing the agency of the Syrian people. I'm discussing the role of the CIA in instigating and engineering a regime change war or an insurgency in order to bring these people into power, which nowadays turn out to be correct, right? So today's episode is, of course, going to be about the attack against the US forces in Syria. So US forces, my friends, have been in Syria for over 10 years or so, between contractors, official army, and also mercenaries, right? You have the CIA, you have the Pentagon, you have the US Army, you have different shades and forms of Americans operating on the ground in Syria with different tasks. The other day, we hosted one of the former trainers and, let's say, assets of the US, and he worked with the CIA, he worked with the Pentagon on the ground to train and arm these so-called rebels, right? In any ways, fast forward, today we are in the 15th of December, 2025, and the US forces came under attack in Syria. And this attack was in Palmyra, in central Syria. 3 fighters, 3 soldiers of the US Army have been killed. The US President Donald Trump said the following about this case, that they have lost 3 great patriots, and this was an attack by ISIS and not by the Syrian government. In this episode, in this live streaming, my friends, we're going to discuss the presence of the US forces in Syria, why did they come under attack, who attacked them, and whether I personally believe the official narrative, and that is ISIS, a lone wolf of ISIS, has attacked the US forces and killed 3 of their personnel, and also a translator or a civil contractor working with them. Spoiler alert, they are not telling you the truth. They are not telling you the truth, and they have a reason not to tell you the truth, because in their eyes, Syria is too important, and the American soldiers on the ground are serving the US empire and its goals, and they see them as expendable cannon fodders in the discourse of reaching to the grand strategic goal of the United States in Syria. So if you're an American watching this, I would like to tell you something. I am a Syrian. I don't hate you. I don't hate the American people. I don't wish harm to the American soldiers anywhere. But the question that we have to ask ourselves, what are they doing in Syria to begin with 10 years ago till today? Have are they pursuing the national security interests of the United States, or are they serving the narrow interests of the planners in Washington, D.C.? And when we come to a conclusion or answers, you will know that unfortunately, if you're an American soldier or you are a family whose son is serving in the US forces in Syria or elsewhere, you're not serving the national interests of the United States. You're serving the narrow interests of the planners in Syria, including reconstruction, investment opportunities, which has nothing to do with the national security of the United States. So when the attack happened the other day in Palmyra, there was a big confusion. What are we going to tell our people? This is the American officials speaking. The Jolani regime, what are we going to tell the public? And also, they don't care their own public in Syria. But what are we going to tell our partners and allies in the United States? Their forces came under attack at one of the first joint patrols between the Jolani security forces and the US occupation forces in Syria. So if the US forces are unsafe around the Jolani forces, then this will raise questions about the competence of the Jolani security forces and also how important it is or how convenient it is for the American forces to continue this type of patrols, right? And rest assured, the Jolani regime does 1,000 calculations. They are worried a lot about what the US thinks and what the US would do in Syria. They don't care about the Syrian people, but they do care about what the US thinks of the Jolani regime and how would they react or what would they do after these attacks, because the legitimacy of the Jolani regime comes from the foreign backing, especially by the United States, by Turkey, by Qatar, by Saudi Arabia, right? During this time, of course, Israel has different interests, and Israel doesn't mind for Jolani to stay in power as long as he doesn't have centralized powers. He doesn't have leverage over certain regions, especially what they call minorities. We will come to that later. Now, Tom Barak, of course, the US Special Envoy to Syria, who represents not only the American administration, but also Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and also Turkey, because Tom Barak is himself an investor. He is a billionaire. He has investments in these countries. He has also personal interests, embedded interests, invested interests in Syria. He will also make hell of a money in Syria because there are huge economic and financial opportunities in reconstruction, in energy, in telecommunication, and in many other sectors. So this person believes, and he convinced several senior US officials that the best case scenario, the best solution for Syria is a centralized government with centralized authorities in the hands of Jolani. Now, if you remember what Tom Barak said last week when he was in Doha in Qatar, he said, we shouldn't push democracy in Syria and having expectations for them to have a democracy in 1 year. He said, what worked best in the region is benevolent monarchies, right? This is what he said. He said, what works best in the region is benevolent monarchy, and that we shouldn't have democratic expectations from Syria. And he went further by saying that Israel can claim to be a democracy, but in this region, what works best is one-man rule. So if that was the case from the beginning, 14 years ago, why has the CIA spent $1 billion per year in Syria to train and arm these so-called rebels? They sold this to their own people that this was to bring democracy and human rights to Syria, right? Because Assad is a tyrant, because Assad is a dictator, and we have to establish a democratic rule there. So 14 years, fast forward, 600,000 people were killed. The entire Syria's economy is in tatters. Syria's natural resources are looted and in the hands of foreign powers. We have Russian forces on the ground, Turkish forces on the ground, American forces on the ground, Israeli forces on the ground, Turkish forces on the ground, and intelligence assets from all around the world, the Chinese, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Qataris, everyone has intelligence assets, people operating as in secret service for their own countries, spying and checking the mood in the country and telling their countries what the hell is going on in this country, right? So if the goal from the beginning was not democracy and human rights, then why, in the discourse of this regime change operation, Americans have started a war which led to the killing of 600,000 people, the destruction of the entire country? Half the country is either internally displaced or refugees all around the world. Now, after 14 years, they come and tell us, well, Habibi's democracy doesn't really work in this region. We need a benevolent monarchy. And 2 days later, less than 48 hours later, Jolani goes to the Umayyad Mosque, and you know how symbolic and important is the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. He sends the minaret and he talks to the Syrian people. He tells them the following, quote, "O Syrians, obey me as I obey Allah in you. Obey me as I obey Allah in you," which means as long as I'm obeying God, I'm asking you to obey me. And this also means that this person believes that he represents God's will here in Syria. And this is no different from the literature of ISIS and what Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi said, right? When he also ascended the minaret in one of the mosques in Mosul, I believe this was 2014, 2015, and he said, he talked to this entire Islamic Ummah, not only to the Syrians back then, because ISIS was more international jihadi group. Unlike Jolani, who says, I'm a local jihadi group. He's also said, "Oh, the Muslim Ummah, obey me as I obey Allah in you." It's the same sentence, right? So during this time, Tom Barak, who is normalizing and pushing the process of emboldening the Jolani regime in Syria, comes and says the following on his own account on X. He says, "One day after the cowardly terrorist ambush that took the lives of 2 heroic American soldiers and a dedicated civilian interpreter in Syria, we remain resolute in our grief and our determination. This attack underscores the enduring menace of ISIS, not just to Syria, but to the world, including the territorial integrity and security of the United States homeland." He says, "Our strategy is to enable capable Syrian partners with limited US operational support to hunt down ISIS networks, deny them safe haven, and prevent their resurgence. That approach keeps the fight local, limits US exposure, and avoids another large-scale American war in the Middle East." So basically, he is blaming ISIS, right? So if I'm going to ask you the first and most simple question, if this attack was done by ISIS against the US forces, the first question is, this was a compound where the attack happened, right? Well fortified, well secured, and well guarded compound. If that was the case, the first question is, how did this so-called ISIS lone gunman or lone wolf has come so close to a military compound, well observed, well secured, and well guarded in the presence of American forces? This is the first question. How can someone come too close to a military compound without being observed or hunted down? Which makes no sense. And the second question is, why hasn't the CENTCOM, which is the Center for the American Forces in the region, why hasn't CENTCOM mentioned or revealed the name and the identity of the attacker? The attacker is dead. His body is there. Why haven't they identified and published the name of the attacker? This is a very important question, right? And the reason for it is because they are most likely trying to cover up the incidents. The real reason, whatever happened there, it was too revealing, too scandalous for them to reveal the identity of the person who carried out an attack among the US forces with the presence of these so-called Syrian security forces or the Jolani security forces. Now, Trump, of course, he also is part of covering up, right? Because he doesn't also want to sabotage the US foreign policy, and he doesn't want to tell his own people in the United States that they are paying the price of basically their own foreign policy, and that is normalizing and emboldening and supporting and consolidating a regime which is not different from ISIS. Take a look what he says.
In Syria, and we had 3 great patriots terminated by bad people, and not the Syrian government. It was ISIS. Syrian government fought by our side. The new president fought in Syria.
So they have sent him the report. They have told him what to say, and he's just repeating the script. The US president has no direct insight over what happened there. He received a script from CENTCOM. CENTCOM sends it to Tom Barak, and Tom Barak shares it with the US administration. And the US administration says, Mr. President, you have to say this was done by ISIS and not by the government of Syria. He made sure to mention that this attack was not carried out by the Syrian government, whatever that means, because all the indications are guiding us to believe that the person who carried out the attack was a member, an element in the official Jolani security forces. So once the attack happened, we covered what Tom Barak said in this case, but what has the Syrian government says in this regard, right? Right after the attack, I'm going to show you the screenshot of this news. This is on Syria TV. This is a pro-Jolani TV outlet based in Turkey, funded by Qatar and Turkey. This is the literal translation. This is the Arabic one. عاجل مصادر خاصة لتلفزيون سوريا منفذ الهجوم على القوات الأمريكية والسورية هو عنصر أمن كان في مكان الاجتماع. So what they're saying basically is, this is the translation, exclusive sources for Syrian TV. The perpetrator of the attack on US and Syrian forces was a security operative who was at the meeting place. So the guy was already there among them, among the American forces and among the so-called Syrian security forces. So our friend says, in a later deleted post, Syria TV announced that the terrorist who attacked the Americans today was actually a member of Jolani's security forces attending the meeting with the US delegation. This incident highlights the fact that the the MOD, Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Information, so ranks are filled with ISIS operatives. So the Ministry of Information released a statement that declined to pin this on ISIS, claiming the circumstances are still vague and that it's probably to a lone wolf attack and not connected to any organization. So basically, Ministry of Information is protecting ISIS. Now, there are more indications or better indications and more evidence that this was done by an element in the Syrian so-called security forces or the Jolani forces and not by ISIS. This is, guys, his name is, just to make sure that I'm telling his name correctly, this is the spokesperson for the Syrian Ministry of Interior, right? So the guy responsible for the domestic security, he is the spokesperson of this ministry. His name is Noor al-Din Baba. He was on Syrian Ikhbariya TV. Syrian Ikhbariya TV is a Syrian state TV, Syrian national state TV. So it operates in Syria. It is embedded with the Jolani regime. I want you to focus on the translation, on the subtitles of this video and the interview with Al-Baba, on the Syrian national TV. There is an important information, I'm going to pause, okay? So we can discuss it together. Let me check if I can do this. Or like this is even better. So let's go.
وينضم الينا من دمشق نور الدين البابا المتحدث باسم وزاره الداخليه. استاذ نور الدين مرحبا بك معنا. ما الذي حصل في تدمر؟
So what happened in Tadmor or Palmyra?
السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته. في البدايه كان
So I have to stop here because the translation is a little bit long. Initially, he says, there were prior warnings from the Internal Security Forces Command in Al-Badia. Badia means it's the area which is deserts, right? So initially, there were prior warnings from the Internal Security Forces Command in the Badia region to the partner forces in the international.
من طرف قيادة الأمن الداخلي في منطقة البادية للقوات الشريكة في التحالف الدولي بأنه هناك.
So this warnings was basically indicating preliminary information suggesting a possible breach or anticipated attacks by ISIS.
يعني أخبار أولية تفيد بأنه قد يكون هناك خرق أو هجمات متوقعة من تنظيم داعش، لكن هذه القوات لم تأخذ التحذيرات السورية بعين الاعتبار. اليوم كان هناك جولة بين قيادة التحالف الدولي في سوريا وبين قيادة الأمن الداخلي في البادية. انتهت هذه الجولة ويعني تم الدخول إلى مقر محصن وأمني خاص بقيادة الأمن الداخلي في البادية. على باب هذا المقر وقع هجوم من أحد عناصر الذين ينتمون.
So he is here blaming ISIS, right? And he's saying there was a joint patrol between the US and Jolani security forces in Al-Badia in the deserts. And then while they were going to the military compound, at the entrance of the headquarters of this compound, an attack was launched by an ISIS operative. But listen to it carefully and let's continue because he's going to fall and he's going to basically make himself look like he's lying.
إلى تنظيم داعش. اشتبك هذا العنصر مع الحراسات السورية والتابعة للتحالف الدولي، ما أدى إلى تحييده بعد أن أوقع إصابات في قوات الأمن الداخلي السورية وفي صفوف قوات التحالف الدولي. لاحقا أو قبل قليل التحالف الدولي قال بأن هناك جنديين قد قتلا إضافة إلى مترجم، وهناك إصابتان من طرف قوات الأمن الداخلي السورية التي استطاعت تحديد المنفذ، مع الأخذ بعين الاعتبار بأن هذا المنفذ ليس له أي توصيف قيادي داخل الأمن الداخلي ولا يصنف على أنه مرافق لقائد الأمن الداخلي كما أفادت بعض الأخبار غير.
So he says that we have to be careful with our narrative, and that is the guy who opened fire on the American forces and the Jolani security forces was not considered an aide to the Internal Security Forces commander, as some inaccurate reports has suggested.
هذا المنفذ طبعا هناك أكثر من 5000 عنصر منتسبون للأمن الداخلي في قيادة الأمن الداخلي للبادية، وهناك بشكل أسبوعي تقييمات عن العناصر وبناء على هذه التقييمات يتم اتخاذ إجراءات. هذا المنفذ في العاشر من.
Listen to this. He said he was from ISIS, right? And then he says that the Jolani forces have 5,000 security personnel in Badia in the deserts, and they undergo regular evaluations, right? And this particular individual who carried out the attack on the 10th of this month, so this is 5 days ago, on the 10th of December, he was assessed as potentially holding extremist or Takfiri extremist views while working for the Jolani forces, right? He was not a member of ISIS. He was working for the Jolani security forces, and he claims that this person 5 days ago, so 3 days before the attack or 2 days before the attack on the US forces, was assessed as potentially holding extremist or Takfiri views.
صدر تقييم بأنه قد يكون يملك أفكارا تكفيرية أو متطرفة، وسبحان الله كان هناك قرار.
So he says, and the decision regarding him was expected to be issued tomorrow, and that is Sunday. So this interview is has been done on Saturday, and he claims that the decision regarding this person, who they believe was an extremist and working for the Jolani security forces, was expected to be issued tomorrow. And this decision was they're going to kick him out of the security forces. But he says, Subhanallah, it's like a it's like a destiny from God, unfortunately, that he attacked the US forces on Saturday. Meanwhile, he was going to be sacked from his security position on Sunday.
سيصدر غدا يوم الأحد كون أنه أول يوم دوام في الأسبوع بحقه، لكن قدر الله أن يقع يعني الهجوم يوم السبت وهو يعتبر يعني يوم عطلة إدارية.
So basically, he's saying we were going to kick him out of our security forces, but subhanallah, God's will that the attack occurred on Saturday, which is an administrative holiday. That's why they didn't kick him out. And this guy attacked the US forces and the Jolani security forces, according to him. So remember what he says here. He doesn't say that we detected an, let's say, ISIS sympathizer in our security forces and we captured him, we put him in jail, or we, you take an illegal action against him. No, they were just going to sack him from the security forces. This is the official narrative of the Jolani regime. Some people say audio. I mean, I'm talking and the audio is working, so you have to check on your side. Do you really buy this? That this person basically was working for the Jolani security forces, he was indoctrinated or radicalized, and they knew that he's radical, and they were going to sack him on Sunday, but subhanallah, he carried out the attack on Saturday. This is a narrative for the dummies. This is something you say when you think your people do not deserve to be treated respectfully, or you believe that whatever you tell and whatever you say to your people, they believe in you because they are either ideologues, and those who support Jolani regime are either ideologues or extremists or complete dummies. There is no, in my opinion, a logical person with two functioning brain cells who supports, like he believes that the Jolani regime is the right decision and the right system for Syria and everyone in Syria, right? That doesn't exist. In any ways, the American press was not impressed by this initial investigation of non-existing investigation. And they revealed some hard facts, unfortunately, for Tom Barak and others in the US administration. This is coming from the Wall Street Journal, and also the Washington Post also posted a very similar article today. They say Syrian who killed US soldiers was security force member. So the attacker who killed 3 Americans in an ambush on US forces in Syria on Saturday was a member of the Syrian security forces who was said to be fired for holding extremist views, according to the Syrian and US officials. Initial information gathered by the US also indicated that the assailant had been a member of the Syrian security forces who had been fired or was in the process of being removed because of suspected links to Islamic State, according to a US official. The assailant was armed with a machine gun and fired on the US and Syrian troops from a nearby building, US officials said. 2 soldiers from the Iowa National Guard were killed and 3 others were wounded. Iowa Guard soldiers deployed to the Middle East earlier this year, including in Syria, and its troops drove to the meeting from the Al-Tanf garrison, an American outpost in southeast Syria near the border of Jordan and Iraq, the US official said. So US and Syrian forces didn't identify the assailant who was killed by Syrian forces or describe his motivations. Why? This is like you're a journalist working for the Wall Street Journal or working for Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. Like you're a journalist, and this should be the first question you ask. The first question. What is the identity of this guy who carried out the attack? Why are they so adamant to hide his identity? Isn't this a legitimate question? Why are they hiding the identity of this person? I will answer you, but let's continue first. So, of course, they ask some fake experts on Syria because that's all what they have. Aaron Zellin, who is a Syria expert, never heard of him. Nobody knows. But of course, they work for establishment think tanks. For example, Washington Institute for Near East Policy said the attacker appeared to be a former ISIS insurgent named Tariq Sattouf al-Hamad, who had joined Syria's security forces after the fall of Assad as part of the infiltration operation and was based in Palmyra. Of course, this is likely a lie, and I'm going to come to that later. So similarly, why are many of the outlets revolving around or friendly to the United States, Qatar, they are now pushing this narrative that this is the guy who carried out the attack, right? So they say this is the guy who carried out the attack. His name is Tariq Sattouf al-Hamad, and he is also known Abu Stef. And they say this is the guy who did the attack, and he was a part of the Syrian security forces, etc. So I don't think this is the guy who carried out the attack, although he was also part of the Syrian Jolani security forces. But I don't think this is the guy who carried out the attack. And why do I say that? Because the reality is much more grimmer than what they want us to believe. While the guy who carried out the attack against the US forces was part of the Jolani security forces, but the picture they are publishing is not for the real person or the identity of the person who carried out the attack. Why would they do that? Because if they tell you the truth, that the person who carried out the attack was not only just someone working for the Syrian security forces, but rather he was in a senior position in the Syrian security forces with close ties to Jolani himself, that's a big scandal. That would be a big scandal. So the guy who most likely carried out the attack against the US forces is this guy in the picture, just behind Jolani. You see him with the yellow circle? That's the guy who is most likely behind the attack. See him here again, just behind Jolani? You don't get to sit in the second row behind Jolani if you are not close to him. And this is him shaking hands with the American forces, a soldier in the American forces. This is the guy who is most likely behind the attack against the US forces, guys. They are giving you a fake and a different identity to cover up the fact that this guy was so close to Jolani and that someone attacked the US forces, possibly detonated himself or with a grenade after he opened fire on them. If this is the guy, and this guy is basically sitting all the time behind Jolani or standing behind him, then that would be a big scandal. So one of the Kurdish sources here, he says, the reality of the Jolani government cannot hide. Yesterday, after international coalition forces led by the US conducted a patrol in Palmyra, just as they were about to hold the high-level meeting, Sufyan Muhammad Qasim, this is the name, right? Codenamed Abu Jabir al-Shami, an Al-Qaeda ISIS remnant who had long been part of HTS, detonated himself, causing the death of 2 American soldiers and injuring 3 others. The Damascus transitional government first called it an ISIS attack, then portrayed it as the act of a radical individual within the HTS General Security Forces. It is a double-edged sword soaked in filth. Whether this person is presented as an ISIS member or as someone who should have been removed from the security forces, the result is the same. He was part of HTS and still is, or was because he's killed. No matter how much the Jolani government tries to appear moderate by wearing ties, most of the groups that overthrew the Damascus government alongside them have ISIS origins and an ISIS mindset. Even though US leader Trump tries to whitewash the Jolani government, those within the government he supports killed 2 US soldiers. Moreover, This government not only killed US soldiers, but also massacred more than 6,000 Alawite and Druze civilians. Given this underground reality, the Jolani government cannot hide its murderous face and ISIS mentality. I totally agree with this assessment, and I would like to add just one more thing after I drink water. As much as Western, American, Qatari, Turkish, Saudi PR agencies masquerading as TV outlets, news outlets, try to whitewash the Jolani regime, they cannot convince the people that what they're seeing with their own eyes is incorrect. I, as a PR firm, I may convince, persuade, indoctrinate, brainwash people in the United States, in Europe, in other places about Jolani and the Jolani regime. But the people on the ground in Syria, those who are living daily with the Jolani regime, those people are immune of your indoctrination and your propaganda, because these people have something that other people miss, and that is objective reality. Objective reality is that you see that these people act differently, talk differently, commit massacres, kidnapping of women, sex slavery. You see it with your objective eye, something that is the opposite of what these PR outlets are trying to portray and normalize, right? So HDS was Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front, right? And then they said, we are leaving Al-Qaeda and we will form a new group called HDS. This is something very important for the Western audience, for the Americans to understand. Being a member of Al-Qaeda doesn't give you a membership card. Being a member in ISIS doesn't give you a membership card. Like, they don't give you a card that you can scan while you're going to your job. And it's not like a gym membership. Like, you can leave whenever you want. Yes, you can leave an organization that you saw yourself part of it on an organizational level, but if the mentality is the same, then nothing has changed, right? And in this particular case, there is something very important for our Western audiences to understand. When somebody holds a Takfiri, Wahhabi, Salafist opinions, the chances that this person would reform himself in a matter of few months is extremely low, unless this person has undergone a long process of de-radicalization, going to, I don't know, a program, a course, a training, to get rid himself of the mind virus that he has adopted for over 10 years. Those people who fought with Jolani from 2011 to 2024 are battle-hardened, ideologically driven, sectarian maniacs who do not know life without death. For them, this is something that I'm borrowing from Bint Halab. She's a Syrian girl from Aleppo. She wrote this on my account. She said, these people do not know life without death. Their life continues as long as the killing continues. So claiming that all of a sudden the Jolani regime has reformed himself and now they got rid of these ideas is delusional. You can leave the organization, but you cannot leave the ideas without serious process of de-radicalization. The people who fought for Jolani for 14 years, and then you saw their videos when they went to the coastal cities and then they went to Asweda. When they were carrying out these massacres against Syria's religious and ethnic minorities, have you seen the barbarity? Haven't you seen the sheer evil? The way they were shooting people in the balconies and throwing them from balconies inside the hospitals? Haven't you seen them asking innocent, unarmed people whether they are Muslims or not? And they were executing them, right? Mass executions happened under the Jolani regime by the same people who they want us to believe that they left Al-Qaeda a few years ago. But the truth of the matter is their leader, Jolani himself, was and still is Al-Qaeda. This is only a few years ago, by the way. I just want to show you this video of Jolani only a few years ago. So he is basically praising Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and all the beautiful, not, let's say, organizations. And he's being honest with us, right? Please check what he says here. This was, I think, in 2017.
أهل الشام الكرام السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته نشكر الإخوة المشايخ في قيادة
We extend our gratitude to the sheikhs of
جماعة
Al-Qaeda.
قاعدة الجهاد
So you see, we extend our gratitude to the sheikhs leading Al-Qaeda of Jihad.
نشكر الإخوة المشايخ في قيادة جماعة قاعدة الجهاد عامة ونخص بالشكر الشيخ الدكتور أيمن الظواهري حفظه الله ونائبه الشيخ أحمد حسن أبو الخير حفظه الله نشكر لهم موقفهم في تقديم مصلحة أهل الشام وجهادهم وثورتهم المباركة وتقديرهم لمصالح الجهاد العامة هذا الموقف الذي سيسطره التاريخ بأحرف من نور فقد ضربت هذه القيادة المباركة بإذن الله ولا زالت أروع الأمثلة في تقديم المصالح العامة العليا للمسلمين على المصالح التنظيمية الخاصة ولقد جسدوا بشكل عملي قول الشيخ أسامة رحمه الله بأن مصلحة الأمة مقدمة على مصلحة الدولة المسلمة وأن مصلحة الدولة مقدمة على مصلحة الجماعة وأن مصلحة الجماعة مقدمة على مصالح الأشخاص.
So basically, he is praising Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and the rest, and telling them, we will never forget your support for our so-called revolution in Syria. And we believe that you guys are putting the interests of the Islamic Ummah over any organizational interests. And he's praising them. And this was in 2017. This is not like 100 years ago. This guy was still talking about jihad and kuffar and apostates and Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri. But no, people like Charles Lister and people like him who work for Gulf-funded or DC-funded, neocon-funded, Zionist-funded outlets and think tanks, they would come and argue falsely that no, Jolani is a reformed person and that because he left the organization of Al-Qaeda. But Al-Qaeda is here. Al-Qaeda is here. Al-Qaeda is not a card membership, right? And I want to ask this to our American audience, especially if you're a soldier or your son is in the US Army. What is your son doing in Syria? What benefit does this guy bring to the American nation, to the American people? What kind of positive outcome are you expecting by sending your sons to Syria and embed them with the Jolani regime? Today I was on RT International and they asked me, so in the past years, no American soldier was killed by direct fire by the Syrian forces or the former Syrian army. Yeah, like there was a de-escalation mechanism basically managed by Russia to not shoot against each other. I'm not saying that was the right decision or the wrong decision, but there was a state in Syria that you could rely on and believe that when they agree on an agreement, they would follow suit. And most importantly, there was a central government and a centralized decision-making that which compels and doesn't allow any Syrian soldier to open fire on anyone without the decision and the order of the superior. Now, under the Jolani regime, What happened is, and this is what I also argued on RT today. Many people who fought for Jolani, they believe in the concept of international jihad. Now, Jolani wanted to localize this jihad. And in any ways, whether it is international or local, the main driving force behind sending or the trips and the traveling of thousands of multinational terrorists from all around the world to Syria was that we are waging a holy war against an infidel apostate Assad regime because he's an Alawite. We will remove him and we will establish an Islamic caliphate. And in the discourse of establishing an Islamic caliphate, we will wage another holy war against Israel. And we will march towards Jerusalem, we will liberate Jerusalem, and we will raise Rayat al-Tawheed, or, you know, all this literature, right? I would like to ask this, Johan, are you here? Can you please check this Ali Khan? I think he is disturbing the live chat. If you are here, please tell him the rules and the discipline, or I will kick him out of the live chat because he's poisoning the conversation among the people, just writing random words and attacking people. If Johan is here, please check. If not, I will kick him out now. In any ways, now that these people fought for 14 years, believing in the ideas of the international holy war and jihad war, etc., against Assad and the broader Israel, United States, etc., once Jolani came to Damascus, he said, we stop here. We no longer want to fight. We no longer want to fight. And we want to have strategic geopolitical relations with the United States, the great Satan that they called the United States for decades. How does that even make sense for you if you are a jihadist fighting for Jolani for 14 years and probably before that in Iraq, and now you come and tell them, we want to become friends with the United States, but haven't we fought against Assad because we claimed and we believed that Assad is an agent of the US? This is what they said. This is what they started singing in Syria, right? They used to say, Ya Bashar, Ya Amil al-American, or Ya Maher, Ya Amil al-American. Oh, Bashar, you are the collaborator or the agent of America or Israel, right? This is what they said. And now they're coming to power. They're doing exactly the opposite. They're going in the direction of the US. They're going in the direction of Israel. So those underground, if you're a Jolani fighter, like, why did we fight for 14 years? Even before that, why have we fought in Iraq, in Afghanistan, if this is our approach? So if I want to speculate of why this person who was in the security forces of HTS or Jolani attacked against the US forces, there was this internal rift within HTS, within al-Nusra. And that is many people who fought with Jolani or supported Jolani or believed in Jolani, they are disappointed by seeing him shaking hands with Trump. Trump is putting perfume on him, and they're saying, what are we doing? And not only that, we, the Mujahideen, are basically organizing joint patrols with who? With the US forces. Do you understand how that can be a conflict if you're a jihadist? I think that's the reason why this attack happened against the US forces in Syria. It's a rift, it's a conflict, competition within the Jolani regime, and that's why they're trying to cover it up so badly, and unfortunately for them, so badly, because they are unable to convince the people of it, because the claims they make, they cannot stand up. Like, we can now, in this one stream, basically destroy the entire narrative with just simple facts about this issue. Something that Americans are not allowed to know. That's why channels like this exist. If you're appreciating this work and what I'm trying to do here, I would really appreciate it if you just hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to Syrian Analysis as you're watching. Now, I will show you some example of how much the people who support Jolani or supported Jolani are upset. Stay for that because I'm going to show you an example. But just before that, one of the former CIA ops officers, Brian Dean Wright, he wrote the following, which I wanted to respond to him. And he said, there is zero reason that dudes from Iowa should be dying in Syria. Bring them home. End this ridiculous neocon adventurism now. I totally agree with him. But what he and others should also mention, in my opinion, is why the US forces are stationed in Syria for over 10 years. So the US forces were in Syria, my friends, to make sure that the former Assad regime couldn't access the oil fields on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, right? Because they took over it. They don't want this former Syrian government to have access because they can use the revenues to reconstruct the country. And they wanted to stop the reconstruction of Syria to allow the Jolani forces or Jolani militants to take over Damascus. The second reason they were there is to block Syria's border crossing with Jordan and Iraq. Sorry, this is Iraq, which is Al-Tanf border crossing. By the way, the US forces a few days ago, they came from this Al-Tanf border crossing and passed through the deserts to Palmyra. I will show you, just for you to know what are we talking about, because on the map, I can show you exactly from where they have basically walked or they drove, basically. I will show you this map of control over Syria just quickly. So this is the map of control over Syria, guys. And the US forces here, there is a big US base here called Al-Tanf border crossing because they wanted to block Syria's border crossing between Jordan, as you see here, and Iraq. This is where the US forces are stationed. So they took this route and they went to Al-Badi. I don't know if they took like this or like this, but in any ways, they came from here and they went here. And this is where the attack happened, right? So the US forces were stationed in Syria, as I mentioned, for multiple reasons. One of them was to ban or block Syria's access of the former regime to the oil fields, and secondly, to block its border crossings, and overall, to shape the outcome of the 14-year of CIA-led regime change war in Washington's interest. Now that the regime change is done, US forces are there to facilitate the transition of Syria into client state. This is the real reason why the US forces are there. And the evidence for it is overwhelming. I can show you, this is ex-Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Dana Stroul, gloats that the US owns the most hydrocarbon and grain-rich 1/3 of Syria, and that the US will use it as leverage to pursue regime change. This is in their words.
The United States still had compelling forms of leverage on the table to shape an outcome that was more conducive and protective of US interests. And we identified four. So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory that was owned via the US military with its local partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this was a light footprint on the US military, only about 1,000 troops over the course of the Syria Study Group's report. And then the tens of thousands of forces, both Kurdish and Arab, under the Syrian Democratic Forces. And that 1/3 of Syria is the resource-rich, it's the economic powerhouse of Syria. So where the hydrocarbons are, which obviously is very much in the public debate here in Washington these days, as well as the agricultural powerhouse. But we argued that it wasn't just about this 1/3 of Syrian territory that the US military and our military presence owned, both to fight ISIS and also as leverage for affecting the overall political process for the broader Syrian conflict. There were three other areas of leverage. One is political and diplomatic isolation.
So anyways, you get the point. This is why they were in Syria. And they confessed it. And now I'm telling you why are they still in Syria, in order to make sure that Syria moves steadily towards a client state. And this is the idea of the Saudis, the Qataris, the Turks, basically saying, if we remember what I said at the beginning of this stream, when Tom Barak claimed that what works best for the region is a benevolent monarchy, in my opinion, they will try to establish an Islamic monarchy in Syria and give Jolani absolute powers, because it is easier to control, it is easier to manage. If you have elections and you have multiple parties and pluralism, and every few years new president, new parliament, it's hard for the United States to manage such environment. It is easier for them if you have someone like MBS. It is easier for them if you have someone like Hamad bin Jassim or Tamim bin Jassim. It is easier for you if you have King Abdullah. You have one person with absolute powers. You discuss to one person, you negotiate with one person, and you reach to your strategic goals via negotiation with one person, instead of state institutions, parliament, cabinet, president, and the army. And no, we want absolute control and dominance over Syria. That's why they want to establish an Islamic monarchy in Syria. It's crazy, but it is true. Now, finally, I will show you a video. And this video is for the Israeli occupation forces, basically, on Mount Hermon on the Syrian side. And they are just cruising, right? This is the Israeli occupation forces on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. And they're just patrolling. This is the exact same place where only a few years ago or 2 years ago, Syrian forces were patrolling and the Syrian Arab army was protecting, right? But Jolani regime has given it up to Israel. And this week on Sunday, there was a Jewish ceremony, or it's a religious ceremony, I believe. I'm not sure what is it exactly about, but this is the Israeli army celebrates the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah for the first time in the Golan Heights of Mount Hermon, south of Syria. This is the place which was only recently occupied, or Israel occupied from Syria, without any meaningful or any even political pressure on Israel from the Jolani regime. So as I promised you, I will show you now this post of a person with 150,000 followers on X who supports the Jolani regime, or supported the Jolani regime. He believes in a holy war against the kuffars, the infidels. He believes in Islamic State. And this is what he said. Just going to show you how upset they are from the state of affairs in Syria. Look what he says. Oh, what a pity. What a pity. What a pity. Oh, what a shame. Oh, you who brought shame. Let history record that Hafez al-Assad, he calls him a pig, right? He says, let history record that Hafez al-Assad, he calls him the pig, and his son Bashar prevented Israel from reaching the peak of Mount Hermon and celebrating their holidays upon it. Meanwhile, a Salafist jihadist group that adores jihad, martyrdom, and throwing themselves into the enemies of God cast the word behind its back. The greatest achievement of this group, he means Jolani's group, after it came to power was allowing Israel to control it without any peaceful, military, political, or legal resistance. And here is Israel now celebrating its holiday from atop this peak. All elements of the regime, of the Jolani regime, and its patchwork supporters must bow their heads to the ground. And all those outside the regime who criticize it must thank God for distancing them from this disgrace. I'm not even saying anything. I'm not going to add anything about what he said. This is exactly how the people who believed in this so-called jihadi war are feeling and writing and saying. And that's why an attack against US forces embedded with the Jolani regime is just, in my opinion, a normal thing that would happen and will happen in the near future, because the people they are embedding themselves with, they see the American forces as crusaders, and they don't agree with the Jolani regime basically pursuing strategic relationship with the great Satan, right? This is what they said for decades. So the rest is for history. On this channel, we will try to bring you the truth from the ground.
Kofi, follow me.